This video is going to be about the middle pillar ritual. Surprise, surprise. You could probably see this coming because of the last two posts. I often tell people, who don't want to do the grade work or who don't want to do the curriculum work in the Kabbalah Magic book, if there were, just one or two simple rituals that you could do that would facilitate your enlightenment process, yes, those two rituals would be the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and the ritual of the middle pillar. Those two performed every day are enough to facilitate your process. And I say that out of faith because if you were to do these every day, you would gravitate into other situations that would also be encouraging your progress, let's say on the path. All right, the middle pillar ritual is quite serious, as is the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, as you have already seen from that video. It should not be performed lightly. It's not something to play with necessarily. It can be fun, but it also is going to stir up some things that could be very dark and disturbing. It can also, give you a sense of energy and lightness and all the wonderful things about that enlightenment practices can do as they carry you towards complete and utter unconditional liberation. In other words, enlightenment. So the middle pillar is normally performed after the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and sometimes after some other kind of invocation, depending on what you are doing. Okay, it is a fundamental technique of magic. Okay, and we're going to talk about the things it does and the things behind it. And I just want you guys to remember that you're getting the viewpoint of a practitioner here and somebody who's an initiate, not somebody who is a scholar. Just want to point that out, okay? There's lots of scholarship out there that doesn't contain the viewpoint of a practitioner. And as such, it misses the mark very often in terms of what's actually going on with real magic performed by real practitioners in the real world. Okay. In the real world, in the fantasy world of magic, yeah, they're both kind of the same. All right, so the idea behind the middle pillar, now we're going to get into the fantasy aspects here. The idea behind the middle pillar is that you have energy centers up and down your spine or up and down through the center of your body. Okay. Are these energy centers real? Like, do you have chakras? Are chakras real? Many people debate about this, okay? And if you are a practitioner, there comes a time when there's no question about whether there are such energy centers. But they are not necessarily cut and dry like this system's correct and this other system is incorrect. What tends to happen in your energetic body is that there's a separation that evolves over time as you mature from child to teenager to adult to super adult as you get older. And these energy centers form as a result of that. They're not necessarily energy sources or anything like that necessarily, though they can be. I often like to describe them as energy blocks, places to work through, okay? And because a lot of times the sensation is when you sort of cleared one of these chakras or whatever they are, they disappear and they kind of don't bother you anymore. All right, so there are different kinds of experiences for these centers. Like if you feel one of these centers, it's probably because energy is getting stuck there. That's very often what's happening, okay? And once you have initiated yourself through that block, if you want to say it that way, it disappears and you don't notice it anymore. Okay, so these aren't necessarily wonderful centers in your body that you have now activated and now they're fully alive. Not necessarily. Okay, there are various ways of looking at this. So if you went to see an acupuncturist, is the map of the meridians that the acupuncture uses to treat you, is that real? Not necessarily, okay? Just as Just as allopathic medicine, no, or let's say germ theory is not necessarily real. Germ theory, I do say theory, is the theory that in medicine that illness is caused by bacteria, viruses, fungi, things invading your body and attacking your body, and that's a view of nature that sees it as hostile and as attacking you. Uh, what we're finding nowadays is that that view of nature, as correct as we thought it was, is not really so much correct because many of the bacteria and the viruses and the fungi, most of them are harmless to you, and many of them are helpful. And when you destroy them with your war against nature and your antibiotics and things like that, your health suffers. So that's just one example of how one theory about the body or medicine, we think is correct, and it's turning out to be not correct. Okay, that doesn't mean that germ theory is invalid as a way of treating illness. It most certainly is valid because it works. Okay, for some types of situations. It's also, at the same time, not entirely accurate, and there are problems that result when you take it as literally true, as I've just gone over. Okay, so the same thing goes for these various energy maps of the body. They are ways of interpreting the body and the energetic system that have some say about what's actually happening, but they are not necessarily the one true version of what's happening. I hope I explained that well. These energy centers, do they exist? Do they not exist? Yes. So when you're working with magic, it's important to proceed in an as-if mode. Okay? That's kind of the way Christians operate, secretly. They proceed as if these beliefs are true. I don't think they realize they're doing this, but they kind of say, well, I'm going to proceed as if Christ does this and this represents that. I'm going to proceed as though all these things are true, just to see what will happen. And wonderful things can happen. Okay, it's almost like a scientific method if you think about it, because if you adopt a certain belief system, it's like basically assuming that a hypothesis is true just to test it, to see what will happen. Okay, so if you superimpose one of these energy maps upon your body with various maps of psychic centers, you can do that to proceed in a manner so that the attitude is like, let's see what happens when I adopt this energy system. Let's see what happens when I pretend that the chakras are real. Okay, and some marvelous things and some scary things can happen when you do that. Okay, now the Golden Dawn system sometimes uses the chakras, but it mostly uses the Kabbalistic tree of life. All right, and this gets superimposed upon the body. And as you can see, the Kabbalistic tree of life has a middle pillar. That's that path right up through the center. Okay, and especially that middle pillar is worked with in the ritual of the middle pillar. As you can see, it has 4 psychic centers, 4 sort of chakra-like globes or spheres, right? There's actually 5. Okay, and those get superimposed upon the body. This is probably the most profound, most powerful aspect of the Golden Dawn teachings. And as you may recall from previous videos, magic is not what it appears to be. And so as you restructure your psyche according to systems like this, you become a better and better manifester of things you desire or things you need in order to facilitate your evolution. Okay. And as you can tell, that you're going to work on yourself in this way. Many of you know some Kabbalah, okay? So the Kabbalistic tree of life, these spheres 1 through 10, this is a map of how things manifest in the universe, supposedly, okay? It's one version of such a map, and if you adopt it as though it's true, profound, interesting, wonderful, and terrible things can happen. We're going to talk about both wonderful and terrible things. So, people who work with the chakras and the Kundalini awakening systems and that, uh, there's a lot of insistence that in those systems that you raise the energy up the spine. And there's the idea that Shakti is asleep. You got this Kundalini energy that's asleep at the base of your spine, and you bring it up through your energy centers and see if you can get it to come up to the crown of the head where the highest chakra is. Okay. And once it reaches there, you are enlightened because that's when Shakti and Shiva are now joined together. Very profound system, really. And there's a lot. It's a very sexy system too, because Shiva and Shakti are male and female in most representations in mythology of Kashmir Shaivism, let's say, um, and the energies that you're working with, you could say, are sexual in nature. They really are more, in a Jungian sense, more body energies and psychic energies, not necessarily just sexual energies. All right, but they can feel very sexual as you are working with them. In the Golden Dawn, the energy is drawn down the middle pillar. Okay, supposedly that's much safer. Okay, and the insistence is that if you have worked with to raise energy up the spine, that's so dangerous that you need a teacher um, to help you work through those blocks, through those chakras that are tied in knots, and and you and I have no doubt you can do some serious damage to yourself. But that would be pretty rare. I think that the ego has enough healthy defenses to keep you from doing a lot of damage to yourself if you're doing chakra work or middle pillar work. Okay, I don't necessarily consider drawing energy down the spine any safer or more dangerous than bringing energy up the spine. And in the middle pillar work that the Golden Dawn taught me, anyway, it's both down the body and up the body. Okay, so there isn't one that's correct. Okay, we can talk about that in a bit, I think. One of the things, I've mentioned before that the Osiris current rises up. It rises up from the earth into you. It rises up through the earth from the underworld into you. Okay, this is basically Osiris floundering in the underworld. He's been killed by Set, and he's now going to be reborn in Horus, and that energy rises up. And the energy of Osiris isn't uprising energy; it's the power that makes the crops grow up, up in Egypt. Okay, towards the sun or towards illumination. Okay, Osiris is a black god and a green god because of that powerful uprising, those shoots of little plants as they work their way up through the soil, up into the open air of awakening, into the bounteous nature of life. Okay. And in the middle pillar, the one way of looking at that is the energy that comes down is the result of the energy that goes up. Okay. This is not the correct way of looking at it. This is just one way. Okay. So the energy goes up the body and then, of course, explodes at the top of the head and showers down with blessings all over you, purifying you. Okay. It's like a fountain of light. This energy pattern is quite real. It does tend to facilitate what happens in the enlightenment process. Okay. Is it literally the way it's described? No. These various systems facilitate the rising of the energy. Okay. And the rising of the energy that we're talking about now is not necessarily what you think it is, and we're going to get into that. Right? It's not something that's the energy that rises up through the body is a consequence of the way that we have evolved. It's not necessarily. Um, uh, it's kind of like a mechanism that has evolved because of the way that humans have evolved. It's not necessarily the way that all beings function. In order to discuss this, we need to talk about what happens in the human psyche as people develop. Okay, when you are a baby, you are sort of proto-enlightened. You're an enlightened being. That's so wonderful to handle a baby, to smell the top of the baby's head, and the baby is just so incredibly like a unified field of bubbly energy. Uh, and their mitochondria are at a pristine state of health. The aura of their bodies is completely round and beautiful and glowing. Uh, but as a result of that, since their energy field is so unified, they don't have a lot of self-awareness yet. Okay, and one of the beautiful things about humans is that humans are divided against themselves. Okay, that causes them a lot of suffering, of course, but it also causes a lot of joy. And I think was it Aleister Crowley said, "I'm divided for the sake of union. The pain of separation is as nothing, and the joy of dissolution all." Okay, and so what happens as we get older is that beautiful round aura of the baby's body begins to separate. Okay, so it's kind of what we talked about before. We have the sort of rising up. Okay, so the energy goes up. Uh, the place that we identify with, okay, it kind of starts in the gut. Oh, this is who I am in the gut. Okay, and there's really not much awareness, self-awareness going on there. But as the human being develops further, the place you identify with tends to migrate up the spine. And many adolescents, when they talk about who they are, they'll point at their heart. This is who I am, and they're starting to struggle with their self-identity. Okay, and eventually, as they get into a full-fledged adults, if like a European style adult, the energy is there. The place they identify now is in the head. Okay, and what happens then is that um, the the aura has now been separated in two. Okay, this is the baseline. This is supposedly where the sleeping Shakti energy is, and the ego has suddenly developed upwards like this. And this can be experienced quite in a quite tangible way. Many people describe the ego itself as a sort of cul-de-sac, or because the energy, as the place you identify with migrates up into your body, it's almost like you're a sock puppet. Okay, and but of course the ego in the head thinks it's in charge, and it's driving its energy now from the energy stream from down below, which is the Osiris current. Okay, but that Osiris current now suddenly gets choked off because the ego says I'm in charge, and it starts to constrict the very energy that creates it. It's cutting off its own energy flow because it thinks it has all of the energy and it is the power source of its own universe. Okay, and in the process, it can make you very sick, and it can make you lose vitality. Okay, the stronger the ego, the more ill you can become, possibly. Okay, because the ego will start to try to make its own universe and deny that it has energy that is rising from down below. Okay. There's a difference between the persona and the ego. Okay. Uh, when I say ego, I mean a persona that is largely unconscious. It's compulsive. It thinks it is in charge. It thinks it knows what's good for it. Okay. It's cut off from the universe. Okay. When that no longer becomes a problem, it's no longer ego, and it just becomes persona. So an enlightened being is somebody who no longer has an ego, but still has a persona. Okay, and they proceed as many people like to say, well, the ego is really important. It depends what kind of vocabulary you're using. Okay, um, I like to say that if the ego is no longer unconscious and compulsive, it has died. Okay, and it has just given way to a persona, and that's all that's left is the persona. Okay, now that's interesting too, because now as since you identify with being in your head, let's say as somebody of a European heritage, let's say because European culture has pretty much taken over the world at this point, we all sort of think that we're intellectual beings, lords of our own bodies, bossing our body around, jerking it around, making it do things because it's not being cooperative. That sort of ego consciousness. Um, the middle pillar ritual taps into that schematic, and it begins to loosen the stranglehold that the ego has on that spinal column, let's say. It's not really a spinal column, it's just the middle pillar energies, okay? It begins to open up that middle pillar. And this can result in the death of the ego. This is what the middle pillar does, okay? It's opening up that Osiris current so that you can be annihilated from below, okay? This is where the concept of the Oblivion Monster comes from. This is a term that I created to refer to how it feels when the energy rises up to annihilate you. Okay, so in other words, you've identified with this the ego monster in your head. Okay, and as the energy of the Osiris current opens up, it can feel as though you're being attacked from below. Okay, and like these devouring, frightening monster forces are coming down from below to destroy you. And it so can feel like that. It can feel sort of like, not that. I can't be that. That can't be what I am. No, no, no. And then you resist and you try to choke off that energy coming from below. Because if it completely rises up, the ego will die. The Oblivion Monster. And all this sort of imagery of the mouth of hell, it really comes from the Oblivion Monster. Okay. In the Neophyte Temple, this is represented by Apophis, which you might want to think of the neophyte ritual as a sort of a shower. You're taking a shower in divine energy, okay? And at the bottom of that shower is the shower drain, okay? And that is one of the God form stations. That's the station of Apophis, and this is the uh, powers of Set, the powers of darkness, which are devouring all the unworthy aspects of yourself. Okay, in other words, that ego, if it dies, it's going to break into pieces, fall down in the shower drain, and get devoured by Apophis. In Egyptian mythology, he was a crocodile, as well as other things. Apophis, I know, it's a Greek word, but the crocodile god is essentially what he was in the Egyptian pantheon. The devouring aspect of evil, the devouring aspect of Set. Apophis is a really good pairing up of Egyptian and uh, Greek mythology. That is also the Oblivion Monster is also Choronzon. Okay, this is the Lord of Dispersion, which supposedly, if you can cross the abyss, okay, you will be annihilated. Your ego will be destroyed. Okay, and so Choronzon is the same entity essentially. Okay, not interested in all the scholarship that tries to split hairs between Choronzon and Apophis. Okay, this is the viewpoint of an initiate who has confronted these things. Okay, and so these various forces, the mythologies around these forces can be very complex. Working with the forces themselves can be quite simple. So simple that it's devastatingly simple. All right, coming back to the Vajra symbol. Okay, just to let you know how these energies work, I've talked about this before. It's going to bring some Eastern symbolism here. If you turn this Vajra symbol right side up, you've got the lotus flower facing up, okay? And remember, on that lotus flower, there's sitting a Buddha who's meditating, okay, or a tantric practitioner who's meditating, and he has his middle pillar energy rising up and descending through his body in the middle, and he's also got these side currents out to the side, okay, that are also in operation. The side currents, these sort of side looping things that rise up from the lotus, these are offshoots, and these are offshoots of the demon that exists right underneath him. Let's say Choronzon or Apophis, that thing right underneath him that's ready to devour and eat all of the artificial aspects of himself that are now the ego dies, right? Uh, Offshoots of that primary demon that's down at the base of the Neophyte temple, though that demon also projects out in all kinds of weird forms out into the environment, okay? So if you remember the LBRP ritual, we talked about this, okay? The middle pillar is tuning directly into that, okay? And of course, the middle pillar eventually is going to facilitate that rising energy, which annihilates the ego. All right. Circulation of the body of light, okay? To talk about the middle pillar, it's easy to find that online if you're wondering how to perform it, okay? It's also in the Kabbalah Magick book, very, very specifically described. You are vibrating divine names at the various energy centers, okay, down through the body. And when you circulate the body of light, that is, you're visualizing energy coursing through various channels around you, looping around you, okay, which is kind of playing with that Vajra symbol again, okay. The most serious current, most like I would say, is the one that rises up through the center of the body and then showers down around you. Okay, and that we've already talked about that. And that rising energy, of course, can facilitate the destruction of the ego. Okay, it's not necessarily going to happen while you're doing the ritual. These rituals basically restructure the psyche so that the enlightenment experience or the death of the ego will take you by surprise. And it will probably zap you in between waking and sleep. That's often when it happens. And you can get a little zap of enlightenment. Usually, when that happens, people will resist and they'll snap out of it and go, "What the hell was that?" Okay, but in some cases, it turns out to be permanently enlightening, and the ego will be destroyed. I think it was Nisargadatta Maharaj who described it. And one day, a surprise day comes along, and your ego is destroyed permanently, never to rise again. So that demon that exists sort of at the bottom of the shower drain dissolves completely, no longer being necessary. And the ego that exists in the head dies, gone. And all you have left is the persona. Examples of this would be Nisargadatta Maharaj. Um, Eckhart Tolle is another good example of somebody who's achieved this state of enlightenment. He's still alive today. Um, so Rupert Spira is another one. Um, Michael Rodriguez is another one. There are people who have actually achieved this permanent death of ego. All right. Circulation of the body of light. Is it a mistranslation to say, okay, so this is really interesting. When I've read a version of The Secret of the Golden Flower, and the scholarship there said that, oh, the idea of circulating the light, which came apparently from that book, was a mistranslation. And so circulation of the body of light, it came about apparently as a misunderstanding because the original wording, I guess it was Sanskrit or something like that, where the actual phrase was turning the light around. Now, turning the light around really, from what I gather, refers to something other than circulating the body of light. And as a result of a mistranslation, we have all these people in the West who are visualizing energy coursing through their bodies and around their bodies in an effort to circulate the light in this sort of alchemical way. All right. Very interesting, because turning the light around, what it actually means is to have your consciousness turn around and look at itself. It's a deep form of, let's say, meditation. Okay, I would actually call it non-meditation when you get to that point. Your consciousness stops focusing in on this or that in the environment, and it completely turns back upon itself and looks at itself, if such a thing is possible. Okay, but once again, I've already said, when the consciousness separates out and evolves up the spine, you have the separation of you looking down on your um, outward world or your lower world. Okay, this is separation between the observer and the observed. The separation between the observer and the observed is very important for human beings because it's the essence of bliss. We have evolved this way so that we are the universe appreciating its own beauty. Okay, so if if you were to say, oh, how terrible that our consciousness has risen up into our heads and is now divided away from itself, that's not terrible. It's actually a form of ecstasy. And so the middle pillar becomes a secret symbol for a phallus. And as you might recall, Aleister Crowley was fond of depicting himself as a dickhead, basically as a walking phallus. Okay, he has self-portrait of himself, like as a penis. But this coursing energy of the consciousness, the way it has evolved, the universe's ability to look at itself and to play with itself, to fondle itself and to appreciate itself. Uh, this is the essence of bliss, what it means to be alive. Okay, so I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union. The pain of separation is as nothing, and the joy of dissolution all. And as you might gather, when consciousness gets increasingly separated from what it's observing, that's like sexual tension that's building up. And then, of course, the union, the two energies come together and then unify into a big glow, orgasm. All right. So, yes, enlightenment is like an orgasm. And of course, but the real cool nature of that is that the interplay between consciousness and what consciousness is conscious of is a state of bliss. Okay, so that's not necessarily you want to live. You don't necessarily want to live in a completely unified state of being. You actually want that dualistic perspective to be operative, and so that the energy, all of life becomes a sort of sexy dance between the observer and the observed. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well. This is why Tantra is such a sexy discipline, and why it gets misinterpreted as it's all about sex. It's not. Of course not. Okay, so turning the light around. The interesting thing is that, well, when you circulate the light, even though that was a mistranslation, you're now facilitating, you're playing around with that energy that has evolved the way it has. Okay, there are many things in magic that came about as a mistranslation or a misunderstanding. Doesn't matter because the psyche saw something there, took advantage of it. So the psyche sees something, misinterprets what the message was in terms of turning the light around, let's say, but it doesn't matter because it basically sees something useful there and develops a whole system based on that misunderstanding. Okay, another example of that is the sign of silence, the sign of Horus. Um, that supposedly was a mistranslation and a misunderstanding. The Greeks saw that and thought it was a sign of silence, when in fact it was just a sign of him sucking his finger to indicate that he was uh, the infant stage of the god Horus. And they turned it into a sign of silence, which is very important. It plugged right into the mythology of Horus because he was being protected from Set. His existence was a secret. And as he was developing, he was kept hidden in the marshes of the Nile Delta. And don't tell anybody that he's alive because he's eventually going to grow up and become the heir of Osiris. He's going to become Osiris risen. Okay, so that that was misinterpreted, but it doesn't matter because it plugged into the myth, and of course the sign of silence is now a very powerful magical gesture in the Golden Dawn. Yes, I would say it's probably the most powerful ritual gesture taught in the Golden Dawn. All right, I guess it's a type of mudra, a Western sort of mudra. All right, so that is the some of the lowdown behind the middle pillar ritual. So I'm wondering what you guys think about that. I'm looking at the comments and I am beginning to think about what I might do based on what you guys have said you want to see. So yeah, please keep the comments coming, and yes, they will be determining what future videos will be about. Okay, until next time.